Okay, we're ready to get started. And we're going to be doing this really fun painting of a bunch of grapes. And it looks like something with a lot of detail and looks like it might be complex, but actually it is relatively simple. It might surprise you. Once you get the whole technique of making the individual grapes down, it actually is not terribly difficult. I know this painting probably scared a lot of people off because it looks hard, but I see you laughing over there, Karen. But actually, once you get it down how to make the grapes and we're just layering them on top of each other, it really isn't as difficult as it looks, which is very ideal in a painting. You want it to look complicated, but not be complicated. So we're going to be using, here, let me just show you my plate, which has turned into a work of art in itself. Hold on, let me turn this little light on. Oh, okay. So as you can see, we've got some red, two different whites, some yellow, some green, and some blue. So two different whites, red, blue, green, and yellow. And that should be all you need for this painting. Of course, if you want to add in some of your own colors, you go right ahead. Grapes come in all different colors, shapes, and sizes, so you could have fun with that. But let's turn this off. I don't think we need this for the rest of the painting. Okay, so let's get started. And of course, any questions that you have, just feel free to unmute yourself.
Need help?
No, yet. Okay, so we're going to start with the background first, and we're going to get a nice loosey-goosey sort of background to start off with. Oh, I didn't show you the brushes that I'm using for this painting. Let me just show you. So I'm using a large flat brush like this. Okay. A medium-sized round brush like this. It's nice if it's got a little point to it. And a small brush like this. And it's a round. Now, it might be good to have access to a little bit of a kind of in-between round brush as well. Maybe not. Here's the different sizes. And the reason I say that is if your medium-sized round brush is a little too big, it might be hard for you to make those grapes. So, and then the small one might be too small. So if you have a medium-sized one available, just hold on to it. You might end up using it, okay? So we're gonna start out with this large brush. Okay, and I just took it out of the water, so it's still a little damp, and that's good. We want it to actually have a little bit of water on it. So I'm gonna start with a little bit of a darker sort of color combination around the outer edge and have it get lighter as it goes into the center. Okay, so we're gonna start with our darker colors and then move to our lighter ones in the center. So starting with the dark, I'm going to take that large brush and mix up some green and blue. I would say half and half, green and blue. And don't worry about getting it perfectly mixed together. As long as they're both on the brush, you're doing good. And let them kind of blend together on the canvas. Now, once you've got that color combination, we're starting in the corners, the outer edges of the canvas. And I want to get a lot of visible brush strokes going on all around my corners. So I'm just kind of doing chunks. They look like, you know, kind of a rectangle. And I'm doing them in all different directions. And what happens when you do that is it kind of gives it a really nice layered, sort of very textured look. So just kind of applying the paint around the outer edges, and I'm literally just kind of creating a halo all around the edge, not going into the center just yet, with this blue and green. Just go ahead and fill it on in. It doesn't have to be perfectly circular. And some of your brush strokes can be a little more of the blue. That's kind of fun. And some can be a little more of the green. As long as you have something like a blue and green combination going on here. And this is just going to take a few minutes. Feel free to wrap this around the edge of your canvas if you want a nice finished look with this painting. It's just the same colors, just wrap them around the edge. Give it a finished look. You don't have to do this paint too thick. Once you apply it to the canvas, you could move it around so it stretches out a bit. If your brush starts to dry out a bit, just add a dab of water to your combination and keep going. Now I'm working on a large canvas, so this is going to take me a few minutes. Okay, and see how we've got a nice little circle of white going on in the center. I'm going to leave that for now. Now we're not going to wait too long for the next step because we want to catch this next step while the paint is still wet around the edges. So we're just going to give it, let me just make sure everybody's got some paint down around the edges. Are we doing okay? Okay. We'll give it another minute. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to start in on the next step, and that is we're going to start blending some lighter colors into the background here. So let's see. Okay, so we're going to get started with that same large brush. And there's no need to rinse your brush here, actually. You can keep it right with that same color combination. And I'm just going to add a little bit more green in there and then mix in some yellow. So green and yellow. So we're going to be doing this in steps here. So green and yellow. And then what I'm going to do is I'm kind of breaking into a few places where I have that darker color and just bringing a few brush strokes in, just a few. I'm not going to cover it over, just adding a little bit here and there. Maybe it comes in just a little further into the white, but just a few. We're going to do layers, multiple colors in here. Just a couple little, it's almost like little leaves coming in here. Okay, so once you've got a few of those little lighter green leaves, let's add some of our white, the one that's right next to the yellow. Let's add a little splash of white in there, lighten things up a bit. So more yellow. Every shirt I own is covered in paint. It's just no getting around it. And I couldn't find my apron today, so I held on to this one for as long as I could. But okay, so anyways, I'm lightening it up with some yellow and some white and some green. And then just kind of starting in on my next layer, heading in towards the white. I'm gonna lighten things up a bit. Heading in towards the white. Let's do another layer here. Might need to add a little bit of water. Now I'm still going to leave some pure white in the center. So as I'm doing this layer, kind of filling in a little more of the white, I am every now and then going to take a little splash of this and bring it somewhere else a little closer to the edge. So you have to kind of use your own discretion about that, where these little splashes of light are going to be. Every now and then we get one heading off into the edge. Mostly working inward. You might have to make a little bit more here. Now, one thing you really want to avoid here is getting like a halo effect where it's just a circle of light here and a circle of dark there. We're going to really break it up. And the way you do that is just every now and then, just adding a little random splash of the lighter color into a corner. Don't worry if you overdo it. We can do tons of layers on this and it looks good. So I've still got some light left over in the center. And what I'm going to do with that light in the center is just, without adding any paint, just dab my brush in the water a little bit and just kind of fill in a little watery, whatever's left on the brush just gets a little layer in the center. Just a little watery layer on into the center. So no paint, just water, and whatever paint comes with the brush. And we'll give everybody a minute to finish that step. So it's important that what's in the center, that you use in the center, is just a watery color, just barely there, because you want it to dry fast so we can put our grapes on top of it without having any of that green pulled out. So it's just a watery sort of whatever's left on your brush for paint, and then just water in the center. Okay. And again, no need to rinse off that brush when you're done, because we're just going to keep going and working in a nice balance between our darks and lights. And it looks like everybody's doing really good getting some texture in there. Feel free to, as you're working, if you're unsure about a step and how it's looking, go ahead and snap a picture of it and text it over to me, and I can, if you have any questions, I can help you with that. Okay, so let's just continue. The next couple of steps are still in the background, but it's not going to be too much detail going on here. All we're doing is balancing out the light and the dark. So what I'm going to do is just take that same large brush and go back into my mixture of green and blue. And in back to the corners, I want to just add some extra dark brush strokes. Now, if you notice, my brush strokes are very random, and they're crisscrossing here and there, not much detail going on. You just want to have them kind of moving around in different directions. And when I do this, I'm going to let a couple of little brush strokes make their way into the lighter green, but not to the center. Just a couple. They're mostly, these dark ones are going to be mostly around the edge. I don't want to go too crazy with them anywhere near the center, but maybe one or two of them sneaks their way into towards the middle, not directly in the center. But. They're kind of chunky, geometric sort of shapes going on here. But mostly around the edges. I want it nice and dark. Some of the brush strokes can be a little more on the blue side. Some can be a little more on the green side. Just have fun with those brush strokes. I'm really whipping my wrist around here. You can see that those brush strokes have a lot of movement, and this is an important part of the painting. And we'll come back later and get a little more detail into our leaves, but this is a great foundation. Need one or two over here to break it up. We'll just give everybody a moment to get this down. Okay, so now we have one last thing that I'd like to do in the background before I start getting those grapes on there. And this is just, actually, I'm gonna set aside the large brush for a minute, just set it in the water and switch on over to my medium-sized round brush. Get a little bit of water on there. And then I'm just gonna get some white paint. So a little bit of water on my brush, a little bit of white paint, and just a little splash, tiny bit of green, and tiny bit of yellow. So it's mostly white, and it's kind of watery. There's not, I'm watering it down a good amount. Kind of a minty green. There you go. And that's with my medium brush. And now I'm gonna use this pretty sparingly, but I wanna get maybe on each side around, surrounding my grapes, maybe up here, I'll get a little bit of, just a few little splashes of light coming in here. These are kind of crisscrossy little splashes of light coming in. They can be a little bit in the outer edge and just kind of making their way into the center. I'm just kind of using you can either use some little dashes of light or little crisscrosses. It's kind of making its way towards the center. And I'm going to do that maybe over here too. Just a few little splashes of light.
Are these kind of like vines or tendrils or?
No, this is actually little bits of light sneaking through our grapevine. So you're seeing light come in and hit, here, let me show you on here, on the original. That's a good question. So what we're doing right now is this, bringing in little bits of just light, nondescript, off in the distance, but you see little bits of light making its way in.
Really bad at nondescript, Leah.
Say it again.
I'm really bad at nondescript.
Okay, let's see. What you could do if you're feeling like it's getting too detailed, just put a splash on there, like just do a little bit of paint and then move it around with your finger. And remember, you can always go over it with another color if you don't like it. Or put a leaf on the top. Okay, I'm gonna do a few little bits of light in here. This kind of painting where it is very nondescript is just so good for our brains. And this isn't a terribly important step, so if you feel like, I don't like it, I'm going to go over it, you totally can. Just go over it with a dark color if you don't like it. I'm just kind of playing with the light a little bit. I may come back in later with a little more detail, but I'm just doing a little bit on each side of the canvas. And then you can put that brush in the water when you're done. Okay, so I think we're about ready to get started with our grapes. So let me just show you in the original. I have a little bit of a shape going on to my cluster that kind of adds to the composition of the painting. It's kind of like a backwards J. Yes, that is backwards. Sort of shape going on with two little, almost like a V coming down like that, and then a little hook on the end. Or you can think of it as like the shape of a jalapeno pepper or something like that. But it helps to get the basic structure of your shape in there first, and then we can go over it with all the little individual grapes. So, and we'll start first of all by getting a little vine coming in here. We have to have something to attach it to. So I'm going to start in on my medium brush, and that would be the medium round brush like that. And I'm going to keep on going with my combination of green, blue, and a little bit of yellow. And I'm not going to mix those together very well. I kind of want all three on my brush at the same time. Green, blue, a little bit of yellow. And I'd like to come off, because my grape cluster is going to kind of come on to the left. I'm going to start my vine on the right. Now, if you want to go opposite with this, feel free. You can go in any direction. Put your cluster of grapes anywhere you like. But for me, I'm going to the left. So I'm going to start on the right and have my vine. So it's basically a little bit of a swirly S going on in there that starts at the top. So we've got like a little, an S with a hook at the top, something to connect it to the top of the painting. Okay, so it's just a little S going on here. And it stops right about there. And don't worry if your S doesn't look just like that. I do it different every single time I do it. Okay, and while my S is still wet, I'm going to give it a tiny bit of a highlight. And just put a little bit of white on that brush without even rinsing. Just a little splash of white. And just right at the tippity top of my vine, let's give it a little bit of a highlight. Just like that. Kind of just on the top curve of the S. And maybe one more on the bottom curve of the S too. Just a little bitty highlight in there. And while I've got that extra paint, I'm just going to have fun with it. You don't have to do this. And when you're done with that, you can just rinse your brush off. Is anybody having trouble with their little S, little vine going in there on the top? I'll give everybody a minute for that. All right, so now we're going to get started on the grapes. And let me just show you from the original what we're going to do here. So first thing I want to do is just get a basic structure in there with paint. I'm going to use a darker color to start. And what this is I used kind of a dark purple color as a base and then did lighter colors on top of it. So these grapes are in shadow on the left side, and then they're getting a little bit more in highlight as you go. Wait a minute, this is the right side. This is the left side. Excellent. So let's start with purple. And purple is something we're going to have to make. So if you are running low on blue, just to add a little bit more to your plate. And it's just going to be the medium-sized brush, rinsed off really good. And I'm going to do, for this purple, I'm going to start with half and half, blue and red. Just start with half and half. You're going to need a good amount of paint. So feel free to mix up a healthy amount of this purple. It's going to be pretty dark, and that's the way we want it to be. Now, if you find you don't like the color purple that's there when you mix half and half, just add more blue or more red to your liking. So I'm going with a very deep plum sort of purple for my shadow color. It almost looks black on there, but in person, it's just kind of a plummy color. Okay, once I have that, I'm just going to get the very basic shape. So starting from the tip of this little vine that I've made, I'm going to get a little, kind of come underneath the vine and then have a backwards J, make its way down and then up like that. This is all going to get covered over, but this is just to kind of show you where your grape cluster is going to be. No, it looks like a little fishing hook almost, but it's a backwards J. And once you've got your J there, let's just make another little shape to show how far out our cluster is going to go. So let's get a little V going there. We want that grape cluster to start up and to the left of our vine. Okay. So it's basically a J, but you've got a little bit of a funny V going, going at the top. Don't worry if it doesn't come out looking just like that. This is just a kind of underneath and under picture going on, just to give you the structure of your grape cluster. So now I'm going to add a little bit of water to my mixture so I can get it nice and easy to work with. I'm staying in that purple, and I'm going to stick with my medium-sized brush. But I'll tell you, if you start doing these grapes and they're huge, then your medium brush is too big. You might want to switch to another one. Okay, so to do these little clusters of grapes, we'll start just at the very top of our J. And all it is you just put your medium-sized brush on the canvas as if you were going to poke a hole through the canvas. So I'm just putting it on there as if I was going to poke a hole through the canvas. So it's just sitting on the canvas. And then what I'm going to do is do a little hula dance with it. Just let it swirl its way around. And you decide about how big you want your grapes to be. I don't want mine too big. Maybe about the size of a nickel is what I'm thinking for my grapes. Okay, so once you get used to that, you'll be able to do a whole bunch of them. But what I like to do with these is cluster them in groups of threes so they look kind of natural, and they don't have to all be the same size. So I'm going to just kind of come right next to that cluster right there. Now it's important you aren't going too thick with your paint. So again, as if I'm going to poke a hole through the canvas, but I don't. And then I let the brush do a little hula dance next to it until it creates a circle. Just like that. And then we're going to do little clumps of 3 here. Again, little hula dance. And they can all be different sizes. They don't have to be, it looks best if they are slightly different sizes. Now I'm going to come all the way down my J, doing exactly that. So you got my little center grape and then 2 kind of sitting off the side of it. And they can touch for sure. We're going to do layers on top of these. This is just the base layer. So don't worry too much about details. Don't worry if one of them doesn't touch another. There's going to be lots of layers on here. So just keep working here, little clumps of 3. And you may find that at a certain point you can just do this so fast. So you'll notice the amount of pressure you put on your brush directly correlates to how large your grape is. So if you want smaller grapes, just put less pressure on your brush. If you want bigger grapes, more pressure. And again, it's totally okay if they overlap and you don't see detail there. Okay, so I've got a little cluster right directly on my J. And once I get that, I'm going to start working on the Y, doing exactly the same thing. working in little clusters of 3. Okay. So once I've got that Y shape done and the J, I'm going to do a couple that kind of connect the two. So just a little string of grapes that make their way over to the other one. And they could just be sitting right on top of that vine. And maybe I'll fill in a little bit in between too. Nice layer. So now we're going to go in with another layer. There's going to be a lot of overlapping going on, and you'll definitely be pulling up some of the dark purples still. That is okay. We're going to work with it. So now I want to just lighten up my color. I haven't rinsed off my brush at all. I still got that darker purple. And I'm just going to kind of take a little corner of my darker purple, add some more red to it, add just another splash of red. Get it a little bit more on the red side. Add a little splash of red and a tiny bit of white to start. Just a tiny, we want to start seeing a little more of a grapey color going on here. So a little bit of red and a little bit of white. We'll call it crushed grape. Okay, so once you have that color, we're going to start working into another layer, but there'll be a little bit of overlapping with the old one. So for instance, right here in the center, of course, I have those grapes, those dark grapes here, but I'm going to start by putting some the lighter color right on top of them. So it's the same process. I just dot my brush down like I'm going to poke a hole through the canvas and let it do a little hula dance right on top of it. So this is where we're starting to get some overlapping happening. Okay, and I'm going to work kind of similar to that, little clusters of 3 that are touching. Okay, and I want to do a nice little layer going down with this. Now, if you have a lot of green in the background showing, try to start putting this color on top of it, like making grapes appear. We don't want any of that background green showing through. This is a really thick cluster of grapes. And the size is right about that of a nickel for mine, but yours could be larger or smaller. And if your paint starts to dry out, you can just add a little bit of water to it. And once I've got my J shape in there, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll work my way up into this other little section here with the same sort of kind of pattern. It's not really a super definite pattern. But basically just doing a little layer on top of the darker grapes. Okay, so for this next part, let's just take a look for a moment at what I've done in the original. Now, you can decide if you like this or not. I kind of didn't mean to do that, but then I saw it and I really liked it. But what it is I put a little bit of orange into the center grapes. So if you like it, I'll demonstrate how to do it. If you don't like it, just go to a lighter pink with this next step, okay? And that would be just by adding a little bit more water. But I'm sorry, a little bit more white. So I'm gonna go, for me, I'm gonna go with a little bit of a kind of an orangey color, almost like the sun is just kind of hitting them a certain way. So what I'll do is I'll take a little splash of yellow and bring it right into my, oops, I didn't mean to do that. All right, actually, I'm gonna need some new red. Okay. And I'm gonna mix a little bit of the yellow and a little bit of red together. So a little bit of yellow and just a teeny tiny bit of red. And then I'm going to add some white to kind of get a creamsicle color, a peachy creamsicle color. And maybe just a tiny bit more red. Now we're going for salmon. Okay, so kind of a salmon color. All right, and this is just going to break up our layers a little bit, add a little bit of some fun light in here. So I'm kind of coming, this one isn't as much. I'm not going to do as much, but I want to do a little layer. Just, I'm working towards the left. So maybe I'll start one up here. I really want to start getting rid of any of those little spots of green that I might see. It's okay if a little bit of the colors underneath come through.
So we're doing grapes out of the salmon color?
If you want to. If you don't like the look of the salmon color, then just go a little more white to your pink. But I think in the original, it kind of gives it some nice depth. So if you like it, you can do it. If not, just go a little more pink. Now, as you get towards the end of your grapes, just leave it so it's got a bit of a point to it. You don't want to clump together too many grapes at the bottom here. Just leave it like that. We're mostly filling in through here right now, thickening it up a bit. And just rinse, give it a little rinse. We don't need too many of these, just a little clump in the center. And then after that, we're going to go with our lighter pink and bring in another layer of lighter pink. So that is going to be just red and white. Red and white. And I would say kind of a hot pink, not too light, kind of a hot pink color. All right, and let's start maybe up here. I don't know, that's pretty bright. That needs some more red. If you add too much white, it doesn't quite look right. So let's see, I'm gonna add a little bit of red. There we go. Maybe even a little more red. So I'm still kind of working in little groups of 3. And they can definitely touch each other. And you can use this color too to kind of, if you have any green spots left, just give maybe some little tiny grapes in where you have the green spots. This is a good color to use. Maybe just 1 or 2 little ones down here at the bottom. Okay, so now while we've got this kind of hot pink sort of color on our brush, there's one thing I want to bring into each of those little grapes, even the dark ones. If you notice on the original, they get a little splash of color on the center of each of those grapes. So you can use this hot pink color, or you can go back into your salmon color, whatever you prefer, or you could mix the two. And just go back in, and each of your grapes get a little splash of this somewhere near the center. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered. And when I say a splash of it, I mean I'm just kind of dotting a couple of dots towards the center of the grape. Nothing real defined. Sorry, Sophie. It's just a couple of dots towards the center on each of those grapes, even the dark ones. We're just starting to get sort of a feel of roundness to those grapes. And this is right in the center. Even if it's one of the back grapes, give it a little dot anyways. So just right towards the center, just splashing a little bit of color in there to start. There's a lot of layers to these grapes, but it's worth it. Try to avoid having perfectly centered dots in the middle. If you notice, I'm kind of going towards the center, but add a few dots outside of it too. Even the ones that it seems like it's the same color, go ahead and add it anyways. It'll give it some dimension. Okay, I think I've got them all. And if it doesn't really show up on the color you're doing, just add a tiny bit more white to it to get it to show up a little bit. So like, for instance, these pinky pink ones, maybe just add a tiny more white to it just to get it to show up a little. There we go. Don't want it too bright because it's not our brightest highlight, but bright enough so you can see there's something going on in the center of those grapes. Give everybody a moment to get through this part and just send me a picture if you have any questions. Okay, so at this point, we're going to start getting some detail into these little clusters of grapes. There are some green ones in here, but I think what I'll do with those is save those to the very end so that our paint dries just a little bit before we get the green ones in there. Okay, so but for now, let's get some shadows in there first. And I'm going to use my small paintbrush for some shadows. And all I'm going to do is go back to my original purple color. So mixing red and blue together, half and half. I'm going to get a nice dark purple. But this time I'm going to water it down a bit. So I'm going to take a couple of scoops of water and get it so that it's not too heavy. And I can use it like almost the consistency of like a felt tip marker. So a little bit of a shadow color going in there, just blue and red, and a little bit of water. And this is where I'm going to start creating some layers. So what I want to do is make sure that some of my grapes are covered. And the lighter ones are going to be more in the front, and the darker ones are going to be more in the back. So let's start with these over here on the left and give it a little bit of a shadow underneath, like that. So it's basically like a little C underneath using the small brush. I don't quite go all the way around because I want to save some room for my highlight. But the underside gets a little bit of definition with this darker shadow color. And I'm just going to work my way over. So not the whole grape, a little bit that's left for your highlights at the top. But if you notice, some of these grapes are going to come out looking like they're on top, and others are just kind of falling off into the distance. You can also use this to kind of give a little more definition if some of your grapes are not clearly defined. And I'm going to do this shadow regardless of the color. This is a little time consuming, but it is totally worth it. You can also use this color if some of your grapes down here need a little extra definition. You want to try and get this on most of your grapes, but don't worry about it if you don't make it on every single one. It's still going to look really good. Okay, so to do our highlights, we're going to do, okay, so for these darker ones here, our highlight isn't going to be quite as bright as it is over here. So what I'm going to do is take my small brush and do a mixture of blue and white. So blue and white mixed together. That's what I'm going to use. Mostly white. It's going to be a nice light shadowy highlight. Okay. So this is the color I'm going to use on the ones on the right and give them a little bit of a definition right at the top of the grape. And then again, maybe just a tiny little splash in the center. Let's see. Yeah, just towards the top. So use that blue to create some definition towards the top, a little bit of an arc. And then maybe just a tiny little splash of it towards the center, just a little hint of light. So I'm going to just do this on my darker ones. You don't have to do it on all of them, but especially towards the ones towards the top, give it a nice little highlight. They're getting some sunlight. And remember, some of them are overlapping others. So not all of them get a highlight. If they're kind of underneath, you can let them be. Like these guys, the ones that are just behind everything, they don't need any highlights on there. I'm going to use the same color as I work my way into the next layer. They're still dark, but they have a little bit of light. A little bit of the red on them. So just a little highlight towards the top and maybe one towards the center. Towards the top. Okay, that is a lot of work. Is everybody doing okay? Okay, good. But it is fun. You can really get absorbed in this painting. There's a lot of fun little details. And once you've got the bluer shadows on there, we're going to get the lighter shadows. We want the ones on the left side to really pop. So using that same small brush, I'm just going to go right into my white paint for those. Just a small brush, a little bit of white paint. And those are going to be the orangey ones, and the pink ones are going to get this. So a nice little layer of a little curve to the top, and then maybe a tiny little splash just beneath it for light. Okay, so these are going to be our ones that are right on top of all the others, standing out the most. Nice little curve on top, and then just a little splash for light. And even with the bright ones, there's going to be some that are kind of underneath others. So you'd, of course, you wouldn't put the highlight where it's sitting underneath another one. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, while I've still got some of that pink color on my brush, on my plate, I'm going to put some little clumps of pink and purple off into the background. See how they're just little dots off in the distance, but it does kind of help with the feeling that it's a cluster of grapes in the foreground, and those little guys are off in the distance. So I'm going to put those in there now while I've got my brush. And what I'm going to do is I'll do a combination. Some of them can be that darker purple. Some of them can be pink. But just using my small brush, I'm just going to do some little clusters off in the distance that kind of have that sort of basic shape to them. Maybe the J goes in the other direction. And maybe they have some little highlights. It's up to you. Some can be pink. Some can be purple. You can make some a little bigger than others. Just a few little clusters. It's up to you where they go. You don't need too many of them. Or maybe you do. Okay. Or you could do a ton of them just because they're kind of fun to make. Certainly less detailed than what we just did over here. Okay. All right, so once you've got some little hint of clusters off in the distance, I'm going to go right back into my medium-sized brush. And remember, I said we had one little grape left to do, and that is our green grapes. We've got to have some unripe grapes hanging out in there. So now I'm going to rinse off my medium-sized brush. I'm going to do a mixture of green and yellow. Green and yellow. And then add a little bit of white. Green and yellow, and then add a little bit of white. Kind of getting back into that limey green color. We want it to stand out a little bit against the background though. Okay, so I would say if you're going to put it into the center cluster, find a spot where maybe there's already some green showing through and just do your little dot and then a circle They don't have to be big. You can do little tiny ones if you want to, or maybe you have a couple of them. But you want them to stand out a little bit against the background. And I'm just going to do maybe 4 or 5 of them. And don't worry, they're not going to stay flat looking like this. They're going to get some nice definition in there. Oh, how about, let's get one sitting right up here. And I would like to put one right at the tip of my grapes. It's not going to stand out too much just yet, or you could add a little bit of a darker green to get it to stand out. Maybe a couple of little ones over here. Okay, so once you've got your green grapes in there, they're the same structure as the others, where you have to put a little shadow at the bottom and a little highlight at the top. I'm going to use my blue for shadow at the bottom. You can mix it in with a little bit of green if you like to get a blue-green, and just give it a little shadow underneath. The blue. Okay. These are mostly going to be on top of the other grapes. Okay, and once you get your shadow in there, you just go in with white for your highlight on top. And it's the same way we did all the others. Just give it a little curve of white at the top. And maybe just a little splash towards the center. Okay, and if the white is popping too much in there, just add a little bit of yellow into the mixture. Like my white is just a little too much white. So I'm gonna do a little yellow and maybe a little green and just kind of soften the highlight a little bit with that. A little yellow, I don't get rid of it completely, but I'm just gonna soften it a bit so it's not so bright. Little yellow, a little bit of green in there. Start adding in some details in the leaves. Now, if you are like loving your painting as it is and feel like, oh, this is good, I don't need to do anything more, you're probably right. You don't need to do anything more. This is just kind of a little added bonus. If you like the look of it, I just got a little more definition in the grape leaves around the edges, and I just did maybe one on each edge. So all I did for that was using the small brush, I went into the light yellow. So I mixed white, yellow, and some green. So small brush mixing white, yellow, and green. Just a nice bright highlight color. And the grape leaves kind of have a jagged edge sort of look to it. So I'm just going to come in here. Now this is, I'm free drawing this. So keep in mind, it looks like a little flame of fire. You can see that. Or it can have the look of a little curly Q coming in like that. So let's do one on the side here that's got that flame, flicker of fire sort of look to it. So something like that. And maybe I'll do another one on the right side in a different space. Like a little flicker of fire. We're not going to leave it as is. We'll fill it in a little bit more, but just so you can have some definition to start with. Maybe up top near the vine, I'll get one in there that's kind of got a little bit of a curly Q coming in, like that. And maybe one more flamey one over here. Now I am going to fill in these leaves with another color, but while I've got my highlight on there, that light color, I'm just going to take it and splash it in a few little spots here, there, to give myself some nice bright sunny highlights. Just a few spots. Okay, nothing, no big deal. Here, let me just bring this up a little closer so you can see. So these are just little, there's one there, and there. Okay, so once you've got them highlighted like that, now we can fill them in. And I'm just going to use a combination of blue and green with my medium brush to fill those in. So just blue, green, whatever you've got left, and just kind of do a little fill in. Okay. And I think it is, mine is finished, ready for signature. So I'm just going to sign it down here in the lower right corner. Water down my light color with my small brush. And I am calling this a finished piece. So, good job, everybody.